Hey, Cameron Metrojean from Met at the Movies, once again bringing you my least favorite films of the year. Remember how last year I said I felt like movies were kind of on an upswing and I was hoping we would continue that trajectory? Didn't happen. Okay, maybe that's not true, but for a while it really did feel that way. I think a lot of that is a lot of my least favorite films came early in the year, so I had kind of a prototype worst list done before we were even halfway through the year. But I did end up finding some favorites that came about in the second half of the year, and things kinda evened out a little bit more. Still, a lot of it I just kind of felt out of the loop with. I heard a lot of people say that this was a great year for horror films, but a lot of the big ones that people liked I couldn't really get into. Plenty of other films that disappointed me, but not enough to really put on this worst list. And even then, there's still plenty bad to talk about this year for me. Once again, typical disclaimer, this is just my opinion, and some of these aren't necessarily the worst made films of the year, they're just the ones that brought about the worst reaction in me personally. And let's get those dishonorable mentions out of the way. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. It's kind of weird how this film feels both better and worse than the original in different regards, but this one didn't make the list because it didn't commit what was my biggest problem with the first one, being bland and boring when you have such a weird concept. This one at least embraced the concept, and is a lot more memorable. Out of Darkness. Look, I know dark, gritty live-action remakes are all the rage right now, but we did not need one of the Croods. The Garfield movie. Honestly, this movie's fine as long as you don't think of it as the Garfield movie. Blink Twice. Easily the worst editing I've seen all year. And if Zoe Kravitz signed off on this editing, then that already has me doubtful about her next directing endeavor. Bizarre dark humor and traumatic events that were bad enough to warrant a trigger warning at the beginning of this movie did not mix well together in this. This movie is basically a Jordan Peele movie gone wrong. Drive Away Dolls. Sloppy, hit-and-miss humor, and such a deflated climax. At least the actors had chemistry. Summer Camp. Lame. Strangers, Chapter 1. Darn it, Rennie Harlan, I want to like you! And I'm starting to forget why. This is basically just the first Strangers movie all over again, except without the added suspense of if the villains are gonna die at the end. Joker 2. I didn't hate this as much as most people because I didn't like the original as much as most people. But still, if you're gonna give the Joker a musical movie, this was such a limp attempt at that. Y2K. Just dumb. And I'm honestly not sure if the film is trying to be so bad it's good, or if this really was their intent. And I cannot believe that on Rotten Tomatoes, the benefit of the doubt they gave them in their consensus was ambition. Did we see the same film? Afraid. Afraid? Afraid-eyed? Bad luck for this film following on the heels of Megan, which mixed chills and camp much better than this. And now, with those out of the way, let's get to my least favorite films of 2024. Number 10. No Way Up. It's almost hard for me to say why this film feels so thoroughly subpar when the initial premise seems fine. Maybe I'm just a sucker for thrillers that take place in submerged means of transport. I mean, it's the only thing that got me to see the movie Derailed. Don't. But then it's like this movie wants to just be a generic shark movie, which would be bad enough on its own, but then it can't even fully commit to that because the characters aren't really in the water with them all that much. But honestly, even with as much of a dud as this film can be, I'm not sure it would have made this list if it were not for that dumb cartoon squish sound effect that they used during the tense underwater scene. Next one. Number 9. Trap. Still holding out hope for M. Night Shyamalan. Old made my worst of the year's list and was awful in my opinion. Knock in the Cabin didn't leave much of a good or bad impression with me, so I'll call that a step in the right direction. I was really hoping this would be another step in the right direction for him, but man was this film a letdown after such an intriguing premise. Like a lot of bad Shyamalan movies, when it's all said and done, a lot of the plot really doesn't hold up once you expose it to outside logic. I honestly have no problem with Shyamalan plugging his daughter's music in the film, but her suddenly becoming a main character in the second half is narratively jarring. And I don't know what directions Shyamalan gives to his actors that have them give such off performances, but he really needs to switch that up. Honestly, I think the 2 movies he produced this year were better than the one that was actually his. Maybe next year.
Number 8.
As a Cryptid fan, it really pains me to put a Bigfoot-centered film on this list. Of course, I already did that back in 2019 with Missing Link, so why let that stop me? Sasquatch Sunset. It's hard to know if this film is trying to tell me that it's thoughtful and trying to make some smart statements about humanity, or if it's trying to be a parody of those majestic documentaries, when in reality, it's just nauseating and gross. Either way, this film is not funny or clever enough to be either. I think I got 2 legitimate laughs out of this whole thing, but for the most part, I was just cringing. And for all its contemplative shots, it supplies enough sex jokes and bodily fluids that it actually has way more in common with lowbrow comedies that critics normally tear apart. I mainly just felt bad for the actors who had to be out in the wilderness while wearing this very extensive makeup and costuming. Sundance, do better than this. Okay, yeah, that one was pretty good. Number 7. I swear to you, I'm not just trolling on this. I do legitimately hate this movie. Anora. Seriously? This was one of the best reviewed films of the year? Why? This may have been the most miserable viewing experience I had all year. While watching this film, I kept getting reminded of another movie I don't like, The Florida Project. And of course, I only found out afterwards that it's the same filmmaker who made both, Sean Baker. Why does he keep making films that are just quick cut scenes of unlikable characters and yelling? And why do critics and audiences keep liking it? Or I guess I should be asking, why don't I like it? What am I missing here? Is it just preferences, or is there just something I'm never going to get? At least the characters in the Florida Project were sympathetic on paper, just not in practice. But in Anora? Who am I supposed to be rooting for? What am I supposed to want to happen, aside from for the movie to end? Also, the Florida Project wasn't nearly as needlessly long as this one is. You could easily cut 1/3 of this film out and nothing would change. All this repetitive searching could have been sidestepped with a montage, and then we could have cut down on some of the screaming. There is so much screaming in this film. I'm convinced Sean Baker isn't happy with the take until the actor's vocal cords are destroyed. All of its problems are made worse by the fact that this movie is 100% pointless. What is different from the end than from the beginning? How are any of the characters' lives on a different trajectory from the beginning? How did the events of the film change anything? Why did this story need to be shown? I'm done trying to understand this movie's appeal. This movie was a headache I had to pay $10 for. And it's gonna win so many awards. Number 6.
Not another church movie.
I actually don't think I have anything to say about this film. It just flatly sucks. Number 5.
The American Society of Magical Negroes.
Oh boy, gotta tread carefully here. I like whenever movies and TV shows tackle tropes in a way that's clever, and early scenes where they're just showing examples of the trope are honestly kind of funny. But this movie was a first draft that needed to be chiseled down a lot because it has way too many things it wants to talk about. And when it does talk about things, it is not good at crafting examples to prove its point. In the opening scene, we're supposed to feel bad for Aaron when every other art gallery piece is bought, but no one wants to buy his. Never mind the fact that his piece was a yarn sculpture suspended from the ceiling at a weird angle. Even if someone liked it, who could easily display that in their home? And then the film almost completely abandons the art subplot, and even the secret society angle becomes just kind of an afterthought, all in favor for this generic rom-com story that just kind of comes out of nowhere. Maybe if this topic had been done by somebody like Jordan Peele or even Spike Lee, maybe this could have worked. But the finished product just feels like an early concept that thinks it's way smarter than it really is. Number 4. The first film of the year that made me go, Miller's Girl. Look, Jenna Ortega's flat deliveries worked fine for Wednesday Addams, but they do not cut it here. Her character Cairo may be one of the worst leading characters I saw in a movie this year. I'm supposed to like this girl? Martin Freeman's teacher character isn't perfect either, but at least he feels human. She just feels like a screenwriter's self-insert so they can write themselves into a situation where they're so much smarter and more well-spoken than all their peers and teachers, and she always has the upper hand on them. Weirdly detached, very overwritten, and then it just kinda stops. This movie just feels like a know-it-all who won't leave you alone. Don't bother seeing it after class. Number 3. Yeah, you all knew this one was probably gonna make the list. Madam Web. Look, I'm honestly surprised that all the other follow-up Sony pictures didn't get sent directly to streaming just because of this film. And I can't believe the scores for this and Craven were so close. Craven wasn't good, but it was at least watchable to me. This isn't anything. And Dakota Johnson, the only actor to be in my favorite film of the year 2 years in a row. How is her line delivery so confused and passionless? The internet's already torn this movie apart, so I probably don't have much to add to it. This movie just feels like there was so little effort behind it, like everyone involved made it because they were forced to. Morbius felt aggressively bad. This just feels like a confused shrug of a movie. Number 2, Imaginary. It's kind of odd to say that I was really looking forward to seeing this film. Part of that's because I had planned, once I saw it, to do sort of a comparison with the 2020 movie Come Play. Do a little give and take of which movie worked parts better or worse than the other, and then I realized give and take was going to be kind of pointless because Come Play was decent, and this was not. Just bewildering decisions from both the filmmakers and the characters, weird attempts at world building, and some of the worst dialogue I heard all year that never failed to just take me out of the experience. Honestly, worst dialogue of the year is kind of a three-way tie between my top 3. And the only reason it is not ranking lower than this is because even though when I saw it there was not a doubt in my mind that this would rank very low on my worst of the year's list, it honestly didn't stick with me that long. I will take that as a consolation. I remember enough of it to know it belongs here. Number 1. Just like last year, a lot of Christian movies made it to theaters, which I'm happy about. But man, when these movies are bad, The Firing Squad. Last year I put Camp Hideout on my worst of the year's list, but at least it was just dumb, family-friendly cheese. But this is supposed to be a serious film that you are supposed to feel transformed by. And it's just so laughably bad. I still haven't forgiven Kevin Sorbo for The Girl Who Believes in Miracles, and after this film, I'm just gonna assume that everything he's in now is subpar. How did this make it to theaters? This is the cheapest looking film I have ever seen on the big screen. This alleged prison looks like a trailer park. Prison uniforms look way too crisp and new. The prison's solitary confinement is an outdoor chain-link fenced-in area that's anything but solitary. Badly screened-in backgrounds, and even parts where fully stationary characters are just green-screened in. They didn't even try to make the wall that the executions happen against look the slightest bit blemished. And when I saw the prison shackles they were wearing in the film, I was almost positive I'd seen those same ones at Spirit Halloween. It turns out I was wrong. I found them at Dollar Tree. They weren't even Spirit Halloween worthy. I have never seen a film fail so hard at authenticity. Whether it's the miscast warden trying so hard to convince us that he's a tough, heartless guy, or just the complete lack of understanding on how prisons operate. I may not have found Madam Web or Imaginary convincing at all, but even those films didn't demand so thoroughly that I take them seriously. This did, and it is so much worse for it. And a bad religious film wouldn't be complete without the incredibly phony transformation. Just like in Running the Bases a couple years ago, it only takes a couple minutes of being acquainted with the Bible for someone to just completely alter their beliefs. Look, I love the Bible. But be honest. And if this story really is based on someone's real-life account that actually happened, then I feel so sorry for those people that this was how their story was represented. And seeing people overhype the praise for this film, or even hearing people get choked up in the theaters during the alleged dramatic moments, just makes me want to say, we didn't get these improvements in Christian cinema by having low standards. As is, The Firing Squad deserves The Firing Squad. And that was my top 10 least favorite films of 2024. Here's hoping for some improvements in the coming year, and that I've got enough in me to put out the best list.